It's been 89 days now since Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home right here in that driveway, Tucson, Arizona. Can't believe I've been covering this now for 89 days since February 1st, pretty much. And you guys have seen me interview a lot of FBI profilers, retired FBI profilers, people whose entire job was to look at a case and try to figure out who the offender is. And one way that they do that is they have this database of information that they collect by interviewing criminals, by going into prisons and interviewing some of the most dangerous criminals that exist, whether it be rapists or murderers or kidnappers, abductors, you name it. They will go in and interview these people. And what's so important about that is they'll spend days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months talking to people, putting all of that information into a database. And then what they can do is when they come out and they look into a case like the Nancy Guthrie case that is unsolved, they can go back and look at all that information that they've collected on past cases and try to determine a profile of who is responsible, which is what we are told is happening behind the scenes, likely right now with the Nancy Guthrie case. So I was really interested in this process and what it is actually like to go into a maximum security prison and try to essentially pick the brain of a really, really dangerous, awful human being. So that's what I'm going to get into in this episode. I want to start off by talking to Jim Clemente. He is a retired FBI profiler about this process. When you're a profiler and you have a suspect that you are able to talk to, okay? So in the beginning, in the early days of the behavioral science unit, which then evolved into the behavioral analysis unit, the original profilers interviewed 38 serial offenders after conviction. And the way they did that is they typically waited a certain period of time and then approached them after they felt that the offender had realized they were going to spend the rest of their lives in prison and they've lost all control over what happens to them. And they basically would at that point feel like they are going to eventually just die in obscurity. We use that to our advantage by basically building up their egos, telling them we wanted to study them, we wanted to learn from them. And then these offenders started to agree to be interviewed by the people in the behavioral science unit. And eventually that evolved into empirical studies. Those were anecdotal interviews, but now, and from the time I was in the behavioral analysis unit, we developed a protocol, and I believe it was somewhere in the area of 840 questions that we would go through with every single serial offender who agreed to talk to us. And we would do that for every crime they committed. And many times that was accomplished because we basically built up their ego. Other times we were able to get the prosecutor and the judge to agree to demand that and to order that of the offender in order to do things like take the death penalty off the table. And there have been people, I think, who've complained about that because that's what the offender wanted, but that's absolutely true. It is what the offender wants, but we're using that basically against the offender. We're using that to gain more information so that we can actually profile crimes, hopefully educate people in the public and prevent these kinds of crimes from happening in the future, but also once they do start happening, it will help us to stop serial offenders in their tracks, prevent them from going on indefinitely killing people. And so this is something that I did when I was in the behavioral analysis unit, and all my colleagues did as well. We all engaged in these studies, and we traveled to various max security prisons or supermax prisons and interviewed offenders when they would agree to do that. And those could be serial rapists or serial murderers or both, serial child abductors as well. The fact is that this is an incredibly rich source of information. We them questions designed to elicit not only what they were thinking when they were doing certain things. So that gave us the why, right? And we've talked about before how they committed the crime plus the why they committed the crime leads us to who committed the crime, what kind of person committed that crime. And so it really helps us knowing all this and building up this institutional knowledge in the behavioral analysis unit that's passed down from generation to generation of profiler. This helps us read crime scenes and determine, when we see a particular aspect of a crime in the crime scene, we can say, we've interviewed X number of people and that number went from 38 by the original profilers to about 1,500 by the time I retired from the BAU. But we can say that in a certain number, in the majority of these cases, when somebody did this particular act, it was because of this particular thought pattern or plan or motive on their part. And because of that, it leaks out information about the offender. And so we can then tell people more and more about the kind of offender in our profiles of these unknown offenders. Did you find that most of them were honest, or did that they wanted to talk to you? Well, those are two very different things. That generally they wanted to talk to us because of their ego and the fact that they were stuck in prison for the rest of their life. Their honesty in order to ensure that we did two things. We studied every single crime that they committed and crime scene before we talked to them. And then after we talked to them, we went back and reviewed it in light of what we heard from the offender. And by doing that, we were able to maximize the chance that we're getting accurate and reliable information from them. We also allowed them, as distasteful as it is, to basically relive those crimes in their minds. And many of them really, really liked that opportunity. And unfortunately, I mean, it's a horrible, nasty thing, but fortunately, it also encouraged them to give as much detail as possible, and that helps us in the long run solve these crimes. I'd imagine you had to treat them like human beings and be polite and sort of try to gain their trust. Was that ever difficult I think about like people who have abducted kids and abused kids, and those absolutely. We had to build rapport with these offenders, and we had to treat them with dignity and respect. And it's literally the only way we were going to get accurate and reliable information from them. And it is extremely difficult. It is very distasteful. It is, it leaves a mark on your soul because you're buddying up with these people who've done horrific things. And because we are focused on the victims, it's a very, very difficult chore that we had to do. But because it is so revealing and helpful in terms of preventing future murders or future serial rapes or future child abductions, that's one of the hard things that we do in law enforcement. Yeah, and I mentioned to you the thought of back to Nancy Guthrie, someone like hitting Nancy, an older 84-year-old woman. Like in my mind, I almost like think that can't be possible. Whoever did this, as bad as they are, like they wouldn't have done that. How could you hit an old lady? But I guess when you do what you did and you go to the prisons and you talk to people who committed these kinds of crimes, maybe you're not as naive that you realize that they've done things that are horrifically worse than that, horrifically. And part of it is they might be a psychopath and literally have no human empathy. They treat other people like they are pieces of furniture. They do not care. They do not care at all about other people. And other cases, for example, with sexual sadists, they actually want to cause and witness the suffering of others. That is what turns them on. That's what gets them off. It's a horrible, horrible thing. So, yeah, there's a lot of different variations of people who we've talked to over the years who would do so much worse than that. So all of the information goes into like a database. Is that how it works? Well, database is, I don't know whether clears throat. They actually have a database, but they have a library of all the results of all of these interviews. It's used to train new profilers, and it's drawn from when they get a new case. And I don't know. I know there was a move to make a database, but I don't know since I left whether they actually initiated that or not. Yeah, I'm just thinking like when you sit down and talk to these people, that seems to me like it'd be more valuable than like writing down the information. Well, they're videotaped. Everyone is recorded audio and video. Yeah, so that makes sense. Those are all kept in the library and also notes. But because obviously there are impressions that you get that may not be very obvious from the video or the audio recording. So I think all of those insights, when you're an experienced profiler, I think those insights are also important. Would a case like Nancy Guthrie's be difficult? Because it does seem atypical, unusual. There's not a lot of old people abducted. I mean, I'd imagine like with a child abuse case or a child abduction, like we've seen that happen over and over again, sadly. But would this one be harder for the profilers? Well, it all comes down to how much behavior is evident at the crime scene. How much pre- and post-offense behavior is discernible from what happened at the crime scene. And I think obviously the profilers, I'm sure, who were involved in this case have a lot more information than we do. And that I think there's plenty of information for them to interpret, to analyze in order to build a profile. I don't know, what the level of information that they're sharing is. In other words, do we know 90% of what happened in that house, or do we know 10%? I don't know. But chances are they are holding back significant amount of information because you don't want to give everything out, because obviously that can seriously hamper the investigation. Yeah, of course. With the behavioral analysis unit, I saw that Rex Heuermann, the Gilgo Beach serial killer, as part of his plea deal, agreed to talk with them. And it made me wonder, because I covered Brian Kohberger so extensively, why that wasn't part of his deal, because there's still so many questions about his motivation and what actually happened, right? Well, as I explained earlier, sometimes we need to let them ferment a little bit in prison before we even approach them. And I think Brian Kohberger's arrogance and his ego probably made him believe that he was better than law enforcement. I think eventually in time he will be lost in obscurity and will actually want to do that, but I think he's too young and too naive and too arrogant right now to be interviewed and to believe that he would actually give us accurate or reliable information at this point. I think it's very low. Whereas Rex Heuermann is much closer to his own demise and was probably very happy that, having spent these months and months in prison or in jail pending his prosecution, that he's already very willing to be forthcoming. He's also, don't get me wrong, he's also very arrogant, and he's very sadistic. So that's going to be a very distasteful set of interviews, but it's probably going to go on for weeks. Would you ever get nervous going in to do those? I'm just thinking, I mean, even as experienced as you are, like I'll tell you, Brian, every time I've walked into a max security prison and those gates close and you realize that everyone on the same side of those gates does not like you, does not want you there, does not, really hates law enforcement, especially people who might have put them in prison. So yeah, of course, you're unarmed. You're at the mercy of whatever procedures or guards they have there. It's a tough situation, but again, it has helped us so much, so tremendously in solving these cases, and it's why I was able to profile the Gilgo Beach serial killer in 2011, I mean, many years before he was actually caught. But I was able to predict a significant number of his traits and behaviors and put together a profile that was fairly accurate given only the information that was public. If I had the information that was behind the scenes, because I had retired by the time I was asked by the New York Times to do that profile. But when I did, it was based completely on that institutional knowledge we had built up over the years from doing these specific interviews and studying all those crime scenes. Yeah, it's so interesting. Clears throat. Really appreciate Jim for taking the time to talk with me. He's been so helpful in sort of understanding everything that's happened with the Nancy Guthrie case and what could be going on behind the scenes. I also spoke with Jim Fitzgerald and Ray Carr, also retired FBI profilers, about this process, about what it is like to go into these prisons and really try to profile someone and then use it in the case like Nancy Guthrie, an unsolved case like Nancy Guthrie. So I wanted to play you now my conversation with Jim Fitzgerald and Ray Carr. How do you think profilers are involved, in the old unit that you used to work in with the FBI? How do you think they're involved right now? I'm hoping they're still involved right now, and there are leads being run by them to help, assess and offer, behavioral aspects to, the gumshoe work of this person and driving by that week and that night and, any DNA connection, whatever. So I hope that's happening, but I hope they're also, and, I'm also a forensic linguist, so language is very important to me, and I've helped solve more than a few cases looking at someone's language. This case is just so unusual and so different than other cases we've seen, especially because almost 3 months later it remains unsolved. I can't help but think that they're the only thing that I keep coming back to is somehow this involves Savannah Guthrie, the TV personality, and I mean, not that she did anything wrong, but something to do with her profession, something to do with someone who she's been in touch with over the years. And it may not just be weeks or months before, and I've said in other podcasts and other media hits that, in my FBI days in New York City, I had a strong connection with a retired NYPD lieutenant who was the head of security at NBC 30 Rock. And I was up there once a month with cases involving various of their personnel, mostly women who were getting all kinds, and back then it was mostly letters in the mail or strange phone calls. I can't believe that over the years, Savannah hasn't been receiving these types of emails, social media, whatever. And I'm hoping the behavioralist as well as the investigators themselves are looking into every odd and effusive and fan-loving email that she received going back 5 years at least. And then, of course, after her mother comes on the show, would certain emails from certain people come up, consistently, "We love your mom," or "Why don't you bring your mom on?" I think the answer to this case will lie somewhere in there. Other people talk about cartels and forced entries for purposes of burglary, robbery. I don't think it's that. This is something to do with Savannah on a stalking type scenario, and that's why this is so out of the ordinary in terms of not having been solved, because a lot of the usual causation factors for these types of abductions, seemingly it wasn't a kidnapping for profit. I said that almost from the very first day. It has to do with something with Savannah. Again, I'm being very careful. You're not to cheat anything to do with it herself or her family, but there's some stalker, someone out there that couldn't get close to her, so he did the next best thing, and translate that however you choose to, and went after her mother. And therein, I think, will lie the answer, and therein will the behaviorists can best help. Show me a couple emails in a row from someone, even over course of a few years, and let's focus on that person and find out where they were, in early February of this year. Do you think, Jim, that the whole ransom part of this is real, or could it be a cover-up for something else? I never was convinced the ransom request was real. I don't think it was a cover-up. I think it was opportunists taking advantage of a situation, from a very wealthy woman, or certainly through Savannah, to say, hey, quick, let's get some money. We have this Bitcoin account already set up. We have these anonymized, emails we can put out. Let's send it off. If this was a true kidnapping, they would have left some kind of a communication on the site that night. Now, unless law enforcement's hiding something from all of us, and boy, it's a well-kept secret if that's the case, this seems to be personal more than professional. This seems to be, need-driven behavior and more than a financial benefit to the part of the person. And maybe it didn't go well, maybe she died right away or within hours. Who knows? The blood, of course, on the front step, maybe it wasn't supposed to go that way, but nonetheless, the plan after the fact didn't go how it should have. But I think I would love to read those ransom notes as a linguist and a profiler. Ray and I have talked about this on our Cold Red podcast, but we don't have access to those. But I never saw this as a kidnapping and abduction, and I think more for psychological, need-driven, emotionality-related reasons is the factor behind why the mother was taken. Ray, is it for the behaviorists? Is it the FBI? I mean, because this is, as Jim said, this is such an unusual case. There really haven't been any cases or many cases like it with an elderly person abducted this way. Does it make it more difficult? Because I always thought like the BAU goes back and looks at other cases and other people that they've interviewed and goes into a database and sort of compares past cases to this to try to figure out what happened. But if there hasn't really been a past case like this, how much more difficult is it? It's not that it's more difficult, it's just that it's you're basing it on the experience that you have. And there are databases that the Bureau has, and in language and in demand notes and things of that nature. Jim actually developed that down in Quantico, the CSTAT database, which was all communications in there. However, that's not what we don't. As soon as we get something, we don't roll back and say, hey, is there a comparison? We run it through to see if there's comparisons. We did that with bank robbery demand notes throughout the whole country. When a bank robbery demand note comes in, we submit the note and it goes into a database. And then we see if there's anything similar throughout the country of someone submitting the same type of demand note. But it comes down to the investigator, it comes down to the people on the ground. And the big thing here is that, and Jim said this, and I totally agree, there is so much that we're not privy to in this that the FBI knows, and not even the Pima County Sheriff's Department knows, but the FBI knows that they're not releasing. And they won't release it until this thing is solved. And I believe it will be solved. It's just a matter of time. Yeah, I always think that in most cases, gosh, there must be so much we don't know. But there's something about this case, Jim, and even some of the sources that I have that leads me to believe there may really not be that much more, and that they really are at a dead end right now, that there's not some big smoking gun behind the scenes, some big piece of evidence in the house that they've been withholding. My sense is that may actually not be the case. Well, I would refer you to that. What leads you to that, though? So, a source that I have close to the investigation, and like you said, I mean, it may be compartmentalized, and there may be some people who don't know some things that other people know. So, this might not be correct, but a source that I have close to the investigation even yesterday said, we got nothing. I mean, we're literally, but the good news was that there were 3,000 tips that came in initially, and that there's tips still coming in every day, and they're still going through all of those initial tips. But my source said we're literally at the point where we're even calling back psychics, we're calling back everybody because we don't have anything to go on right now. Yeah. And Brian, I'll defer to you.